The gunshot echoed across the plains of Montana Territory in 1878, as Beatrice King slumped to the ground, her trembling hands clutching her side where blood seeped through her cotton dress. Her husband Gerald's cold eyes showed no remorse as he mounted his horse, the wedding band he'd ripped from her finger glinting in the afternoon sun as he tucked it into his pocket alongside her family's savings. "You'll die out here, Bea," Gerald spat, looking down at his wife of 3 years bleeding in the yard of their homestead. "Should have never questioned me about that money. It's mine now, just like everything else." Beatrice couldn't speak, the pain too overwhelming as she watched the man she once loved become a stranger, turning his horse and galloping away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. The betrayal hurt worse than the bullet in her side. She discovered his gambling debts that morning, confronted him about the money he'd stolen from her hope chest money meant for their future, for the child she hadn't yet told him about. The yard spun around her as she tried to stand, collapsing back into the dirt. Miles from the nearest town, she knew her chances were slim. Their nearest neighbors were the Thompsons, a good hour's ride away. In the fading light of dusk, with coyotes beginning their nightly chorus, Beatrice closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. The thunder of approaching hooves made her eyes snap open, hope and fear mingling in her chest. Had Gerald returned to finish what he started? But instead of her husband's familiar silhouette, she saw a stranger on a Palomino stallion, his face obscured by the setting sun behind him. Ethan Taylor had been riding the boundary of the ranch where he worked when he spotted smoke from a distant chimney. New to the area, he decided to introduce himself to the neighbors, never expecting to find a woman bleeding out in her front yard. "Madam." He called out, dismounting in one fluid motion and rushing to her side, his hand immediately pressed against her wound, stemming the flow of blood. "What happened? Who did this to you?" Beatrice's vision swam, but she registered the concern in the stranger's deep blue eyes, the gentle strength in his weathered hands. "My husband," she managed to whisper. "He shot me, took everything." Ethan's jaw tightened with anger. "We need to get you to a doctor." He glanced around the isolated homestead, calculating. "Town's too far, my ranch is closer." Without hesitation, he tore a strip from his own shirt, creating a makeshift bandage to slow the bleeding. With careful movements, he gathered Beatrice into his arms. Despite her pain, she noted the respectful way he handled her, as if she were made of precious china. He lifted her onto his horse and mounted behind her, one arm secure around her waist to hold her steady. "I've got you, madam," he said, his voice low and reassuring near her ear. "Hold on tight." The Rocking T Ranch is about an hour's ride across the prairie. Our cook used to be an Army medic. He'll know what to do. As they rode, Beatrice drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them and the solid presence of the cowboy behind her. She didn't know this man, yet he'd become her lifeline, carrying her across the vast Montana prairie as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "Stay with me," Ethan urged whenever he felt her slipping. "Talk to me. What's your name?" "Beatrice," she murmured. "Beatrice King." "I'm Ethan Taylor, foreman at the Rocking T." His voice anchored her to consciousness. "You're going to be all right, Miss Beatrice, I promise." She wanted to correct him, to say she was Mrs. King, but the title suddenly felt hollow. The man who'd made her a wife had abandoned her to die. Perhaps she was Miss Beatrice again if she survived. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, silver blue in the moonlight. Beatrice's thoughts scattered like wind-blown leaves, memories of her life before Gerald, of her parents' small farm in Kansas, of the hopes she'd had coming west as a new bride. She thought of the child within her, barely more than a whisper of life, and found new determination to survive. "There it is," Ethan finally said, pointing to lights twinkling in the distance. "Rocking T, just hold on a little longer." The ranch house loomed large as they approached, lanterns burning in the windows. Ethan didn't slow his horse until they reached the main house, shouting for help even before they came to a complete stop. "Doc, Martha, need help out here." Doors flew open, and people rushed out: a grizzled older man with a limp, a matronly woman with her sleeves already rolled up, and several ranch hands whose curious expressions turned serious when they saw the blood-soaked woman in their foreman's arms. "Gerald King did this," Ethan explained as he carefully dismounted with Beatrice. "Left her to die at their homestead north of here." "That no-good snake," muttered the older man. "Doc," Beatrice presumed. "Bring her in, quick now, Martha. We'll need hot water and my medical kit." What followed was a blur of pain and voices as they extracted the bullet from her side. Beatrice screamed once, then bit down on the leather strap they placed between her teeth. Through it all, she was aware of Ethan's presence, his hand sometimes holding hers, his voice a constant reassurance in the storm of agony. "You're doing fine, Miss Beatrice. Doc's the best there is. Just hold on." When she finally woke properly, sunlight was streaming through unfamiliar curtains. She lay in a clean bed, wearing a nightgown that wasn't her own, her side bandaged tightly. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then it all flooded back: Gerald's betrayal, the gunshot, and the cowboy who'd carried her across the prairie. The door opened quietly and Martha entered with a tray. "Ah, you're awake. Good. Doc said you needed rest and food to replace the blood you lost." "The baby," Beatrice whispered, her hand going instinctively to her stomach. "Is my baby." Martha's eyes widened slightly, then softened. "You're with child. Doc didn't realize, but there's been no sign you've lost it. How far along are you?" "Just over 2 months," Beatrice replied, relief washing over her. "I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Gerald." "Well, that's something to be thankful for. Now eat this broth. You need your strength." As Beatrice sipped the rich broth, Martha explained that she was at the main house of the Rocking T Ranch, owned by Jacob Thompson. Doc, whose real name was Frederick Miller, had removed the bullet successfully. She'd been unconscious for nearly a full day. "And the man who brought me here?" Beatrice asked, trying to sound casual. Martha's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "Ethan's been pacing outside like a worried father. Wouldn't leave your side until I forced him to get some sleep this morning." As if summoned by his name, there was a knock at the door, and Ethan appeared, hat in hand, his face showing relief when he saw Beatrice awake. "Miss Beatrice," he said, nodding respectfully. "Good to see some color back in your cheeks." Martha excused herself with a knowing glance between them, leaving the door ajar for propriety's sake. "Mr. Taylor," Beatrice said, feeling suddenly shy. "I owe you my life." "Any decent man would have done the same," he replied, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true in these harsh territories. "Have you? Has anyone gone after Gerald?" she asked, her voice small. Ethan's expression hardened. "Sheriff Thompson, the ranch owner's brother, rode out with some men when I told him what happened. They'll find him, Miss Beatrice. He won't get away with what he did." Beatrice nodded, conflicted. Part of her wanted justice, but another part just wanted to forget Gerald King existed. "The homestead? I sent some of the hands to secure it. Your livestock has been brought here for safekeeping. Nothing else was taken." Tears welled in her eyes at his thoughtfulness. "Thank you." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, unused to such gratitude. "The boss says you're welcome to stay as long as you need. Martha could use the help in the house once you're recovered, if you're willing." It was kindness beyond measure, offering her not just shelter but a way to earn her keep. "That's very generous." "It's what neighbors do," he said simply, then hesitated. "I should let you rest. Doc says you need to stay in bed at least another day." As he turned to leave, Beatrice called out, "Mr. Taylor." When he looked back, she continued, Would you sit with me a while? I don't fancy being alone with my thoughts just now." The smile that spread across his face transformed his serious countenance, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "I'd be honored, Miss Beatrice." He pulled a chair close to her bed, and they talked about nothing important at first, just the weather and the ranch. But as the afternoon wore on, their conversation deepened. She learned he was 32, originally from Texas, and had been working cattle since he was 14. He'd come to Montana 3 years ago, drawn by stories of good grazing land and opportunity. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Kansas, her dreams of having her own farm one day, and how she'd met Gerald when he'd come through her town with a cattle drive. She carefully avoided mentioning her pregnancy, unsure how he might react to that complication. Days passed, and Beatrice grew stronger. Martha helped her move to a small room off the kitchen, insisting she was no trouble. As soon as she could stand without dizziness, Beatrice began helping with light chores, mending, shelling peas, kneading bread. The routine was comforting, the ranch's inhabitants becoming like family in a way her own husband had never allowed. Ethan visited her daily, sometimes just for a few minutes between his duties, sometimes longer in the evenings. They developed an easy friendship, though Beatrice couldn't help noticing the way her pulse quickened whenever he entered a room, or how his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. A week after her arrival, Sheriff Thompson returned with news. Gerald had been tracked to a gambling hall in Helena, where he'd already lost most of the money he'd stolen. He was now in custody, facing charges of attempted murder and theft. "They'll need your testimony at the trial, Mrs. King," the sheriff said gently. The title struck Beatrice like another bullet. "When will that be?" "Not for a couple of months. The circuit judge won't be through until then." 2 months. By then, her pregnancy would be impossible to hide. But perhaps that was for the best. Let the judge see what kind of man would try to kill the mother of his unborn child. That night, after everyone had retired, Beatrice slipped outside to sit on the porch steps. The vastness of the night sky always calmed her, the infinite stars reminding her how small her troubles were in the grand scheme of things. She didn't hear Ethan approach until he spoke. "Mind some company?" Startled, she made room for him on the step. "Couldn't sleep either." He shook his head, settling beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. "Been thinking about what the sheriff said, about the trial." "I have to go," she said quietly. "I know that. I'll go with you," he offered immediately. "You shouldn't have to face him alone." The kindness of it made her throat tight with emotion. Before she could think better of it, she blurted out, "Ethan, there's something you should know." Taking a deep breath, she continued, "I'm with child, Gerald's child, that's why." That's why what he did was even more unforgivable. She expected shock, perhaps disgust or pity. Instead, Ethan's expression reflected only anger on her behalf, followed by a gentleness that made her heart ache. "That doesn't change anything about my offer," he said firmly. "Except maybe to make it more important that you have someone at your side." Relief washed over her. "Thank you for not judging me." "Judge you for what? Being betrayed by the man who promised to protect you?" He shook his head vehemently. "If anything, I judge myself for not introducing myself to my neighbors sooner. Maybe I could have prevented this. Or maybe he would have shot you too," she countered. Gerald was unpredictable when angry. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars. Finally, Ethan spoke again. "What will you do after? Go back to the homestead?" It was a question she'd been avoiding. "I don't know, the thought of living there alone, especially with a baby coming." She shivered. "But I don't have many options." "You have more than you think," he said quietly. "This ranch always needs good hands, and not just for cattle. Jacob's been talking about expanding the vegetable gardens, maybe adding an orchard. Said his wife always wanted that before she passed." "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Taylor?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. "I'm offering you possibilities, Miss Beatrice." His voice was warm in the darkness. "This territory's full of them if you're willing to see them." As weeks passed, Beatrice's strength returned completely, though her middle began to thicken with the growing child. Martha helped let out her dresses, while the ranch hands pretended not to notice, treating her with the same respectful camaraderie as before. Ethan, however, became even more attentive. He brought her wildflowers he'd spotted while riding the range, whittled a small wooden horse for the baby, and took to reading aloud from a book of poetry in the evenings, something that earned him good-natured ribbing from the other cowboys. For her part, Beatrice found herself watching for him whenever he was away, her heart lifting at the sight of him returning. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just friendship, but the truth was more complicated. She was falling in love with Ethan Taylor, even as she remained legally bound to the man who had tried to kill her. The morning of the trial arrived with a crisp autumn chill. Beatrice dressed carefully in her best dress, now obviously pregnant at 5 months. Ethan drove her to town in the ranch's buggy, the journey quiet as she mentally prepared herself to face Gerald again. The courthouse in Helena was crowded, news of the sensational case having spread throughout the territory. Beatrice held her head high as whispers followed her down the aisle, Ethan's solid presence beside her a shield against the curious stares. When Gerald was brought in, shackled and unkempt, their eyes met briefly. His gaze dropped to her swollen belly, and something like shock passed over his face before it hardened into contempt. The trial proceeded swiftly. Beatrice testified clearly, her voice steady as she recounted Gerald's theft and attack. Ethan testified about finding her, his controlled anger evident in every precise word. The evidence was overwhelming, including Gerald's confession to the sheriff when arrested. When the judge asked Gerald if he had anything to say in his defense, he stood with a sneer. "She was always nagging me about money. A man can only take so much. Besides, if I'd really wanted her dead, she would be, couldn't even do that right." Gasps echoed around the courtroom at his callousness. The judge's face darkened as he pronounced the verdict, guilty. The sentence, 20 years in the territorial prison. As Gerald was led away, he turned to spit one final venomous remark at Beatrice. "That brat probably ain't even mine," Ethan started forward, but Beatrice caught his arm. "He's not worth it," she whispered. "It's over." Outside the courthouse, in the clear mountain air, Beatrice felt as if a great weight had lifted. "I never have to see him again," she said wonderingly. "No, you don't," Ethan agreed, helping her into the buggy. "But there's something else we need to discuss." His serious tone made her nervous until he continued, "Jacob's lawyer is here in Helena. He says you can file for divorce on grounds of attempted murder. Gerald's conviction makes it straightforward. You wouldn't have to wait for him to be released. Freedom." The possibility hadn't even occurred to her. "I could be free of him, legally, completely," Ethan confirmed. "The lawyer can file the papers today if you want." Tears of relief filled her eyes. "Yes, please, yes." The divorce proceedings were indeed simple given the circumstances. By the time they left Helena 2 days later, Beatrice was legally Beatrice King again, no longer bound to the man who had betrayed her so completely. On the journey back to the ranch, with the mountains painted gold and crimson with autumn colors, Ethan seemed unusually quiet. Finally, as they stopped to rest the horses by a clear stream, he turned to her with determination in his eyes. "Beatrice, I need to speak plainly." He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "These past months, getting to know you, seeing your strength and kindness. I've grown to care for you deeply, more than care, I love you," her breath caught, though she'd begun to hope, to dream of this moment. Hearing the words made her heart soar. "I know it's soon," he continued hastily. "I know you're still healing in more ways than one. And there's the baby to consider. But I want you to know that my feelings are sincere and they include the little one you're carrying." Beatrice squeezed his hands. "Ethan, you don't need to answer now," he assured her. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. I'll wait as long as you need." But Beatrice didn't need time. The contrast between this man and her former husband couldn't be clearer. Where Gerald had been selfish and cruel, Ethan was generous and kind. Where Gerald had seen her as a possession, Ethan saw her as a person to cherish. "I love you too," she said simply. "I think I have for a while now." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her a gentle, reverent kiss that held promise rather than demand. When they parted, both smiling foolishly, Ethan cleared his throat. "There's something else. Jacob's offered me the foreman's cabin permanently. It's small but sturdy with 2 rooms, he says. He says it could use a woman's touch." Beatrice understood the unspoken question. "Are you asking me to marry you, Ethan Taylor?" "I'm asking if you might consider it someday, when you're ready." "The cabin's yours either way," Jacob insisted. "Said you've earned your place on the rocking tee." She considered his words carefully. "I won't enter another marriage lightly, Ethan. I need to be sure." "I understand completely," he replied, no disappointment in his voice. "We have time." They returned to the ranch as a couple, though an unconventional one. Beatrice moved into the foreman's cabin alone, accepting Jacob's generous offer while maintaining her independence. Ethan continued to sleep in the bunkhouse with the other unmarried hands, courting her properly with chaperoned visits and rides across the prairie. As her pregnancy progressed, the ranch community embraced her fully. Martha taught her to make preserves and quilts for the baby. Doc checked on her regularly, assuring her that despite her ordeal, the child was developing normally. The ranch hands built a cradle from pine and presented it to her with awkward pride. And Ethan was her constant, bringing her ginger tea when morning sickness lingered, reading to both her and the baby each evening, planning for a future she was gradually allowing herself to imagine. Winter came to Montana with a fierceness that took Beatrice's breath away. The world outside became a pristine white wilderness, the ranch buildings huddled together against the snow and wind. Inside her cabin, with its cheerful fire and curtains she'd sewn herself, Beatrice felt safer than she had in years. On a particularly bitter December night, with the wind howling around the eaves, she felt the first strong contractions. The baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks, but it seemed her child was impatient to meet the world. Martha, who had been staying with her as her time drew near, immediately sent for Doc and Ethan. The labor progressed rapidly, too fast for comfort. By the time they arrived, Beatrice was already pushing, her face flushed with effort. "You're doing beautifully," Martha encouraged as Doc prepared his instruments. "First babies often take their time, but this little one's in a hurry." Ethan paced outside in the snow, impervious to the cold, praying fervently. When a newborn's cry pierced the night, he froze, his heart hammering. Minutes later, Martha opened the door, her face wreathed in smiles. "Come meet your daughter," she said to Beatrice's former rescuer, now her devoted suitor. Inside, Beatrice lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as Ethan entered, her eyes filled with wonder. "She's perfect," she whispered. "Would you like to hold her?" With trembling hands, Ethan accepted the newborn, marveling at the delicate features and shock of dark hair. "She's beautiful, like her mother." "I've been thinking about names," Beatrice said softly. "I'd like to call her Hope, Hope for a new beginning." "Hope," Ethan repeated, testing the name. "It's perfect." As Christmas approached, Beatrice recovered her strength, marveling at her daughter's tiny perfections and the new depth of love she felt. On Christmas Eve, the entire ranch gathered in the main house for a celebration. Even in the rugged territory, they maintained traditions, a small tree decorated with paper stars and popcorn strings. Carols around the piano Jacob had brought west for his late wife, gifts exchanged with genuine affection. When Ethan asked to speak with Beatrice privately, leading her to the relative quiet of the front porch, she wasn't surprised. The stars overhead were brilliant in the clear, cold night, reminiscent of the evening months ago when they'd first acknowledged their feelings. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. Inside was a simple silver ring, unadorned but beautifully crafted. "It was my mother's," Ethan explained. "She made me promise I'd only give it to the woman who held my heart completely." Beatrice touched it reverently. "It's lovely." "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," he assured her. "I just wanted you to have it, to know that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, my offer stands. I want to build a life with you and Hope. I want to be a father to her and perhaps more children someday. I want to grow old watching sunsets with you on our porch." Tears glistened in Beatrice's eyes as she closed her hand around the ring. "Ask me," she whispered. Ethan blinked, momentarily confused. "What?" Ask me properly, Ethan Taylor, right now. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Solemnly, he knelt in the snow at her feet. Beatrice King, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Will you allow me to love you and hope for all our days? Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, with all my heart. They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in the main house of the Rocking T Ranch. Jacob gave the bride away, Martha stood as her attendant, and Doc held little Hope, who slept peacefully through the entire ceremony. The ranch hands cleaned up and wore their Sunday best, standing awkwardly but proudly as witnesses to their foreman's happiness. Beatrice wore a dress of deep blue wool, with a sprig of winter holly in her hair. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her as they spoke their vows, his voice clear and certain as he promised to cherish and protect her all the days of his life. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the circuit preacher declared. Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Taylor. As they sealed their union with a kiss, Beatrice marveled at how life could change so dramatically in less than a year. From the depths of betrayal and near death to this moment of pure joy, it seemed almost like a dream, but Ethan's arms around her were real. Hope's soft cooing from Doc's arms was real. And the love that filled the room from this makeshift family that had embraced her when she had nothing was the most real thing of all. Spring came to Montana in a riot of wildflowers and new grass. The Taylors' garden flourished under Beatrice's care, the cabin expanded with a new room Ethan and the hands had built during the winter. Hope grew plump and happy, adored by everyone on the ranch but especially by Ethan, who read to her every night and carried her proudly whenever possible. On a warm May evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Ethan took Beatrice's hand in his. "Are you happy?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally as if amazed by his good fortune. "Completely," she assured him, leaning against his shoulder. "More than I ever thought possible." Hope slept peacefully in her cradle nearby, her dark lashes fanned against her cheeks. Inside, bread was rising for tomorrow's breakfast. In the corrals, horses nickered softly as ranch hands finished their evening chores. Life had found a rhythm, a sweetness Beatrice savored daily. "I got a letter from Jacob today," Ethan mentioned, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. "He's getting older, thinking about the future of the ranch. Says he's never had children of his own, has no family except his brother the sheriff." "Is he unwell?" Beatrice asked, concerned for the kind man who had given them so much. "No, nothing like that, but he's proposed something. Unexpected." Ethan took a deep breath. "He wants to make me a partner in the Rocking T. Says eventually he'd like to see it passed to us to Hope and any other children we might have." Beatrice gasped. "Ethan, that's incredible. The Rocking T is one of the largest spreads in the territory, I know." "I told him I'd need to discuss it with my wife." His pride in saying those words was still evident, even months after their wedding. "It would mean staying here permanently, putting down real roots." "As if we haven't already," she laughed, gesturing to her garden and the cabin they'd made their own. "Of course we should accept. This place has been our salvation." Ethan pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "No, Beatrice, you've been mine. From the moment I found you, you gave me purpose, a reason to be better than I was. Everything good in my life came after you." As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, Beatrice thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and terror of Gerald's betrayal, the desperate ride across the prairie in a stranger's arms, the gradual healing of her body and heart, and finally, the love that had bloomed unexpectedly in the aftermath of tragedy. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked softly. "What would have happened if you hadn't decided to introduce yourself to the new neighbors that day?" Ethan's arms tightened around her. "I try not to, the thought of not finding you." He shook his head. "I believe some things are meant to be, Beatrice. I believe I was supposed to find you to love you. And I believe I was meant to be found," she whispered, "to be carried across that prairie to a new life I couldn't even imagine." Hope stirred in her cradle, making the soft noises that preceded waking. Beatrice moved to attend to her, but Ethan was already rising. "I'll get her," he said. "You rest." Watching him tenderly lift their daughter, for she was truly their daughter now. In every way that mattered, Beatrice felt a completeness she had once thought impossible. The scars from Gerald's bullet had faded to a silvery line on her side, just as the wounds to her heart had healed under Ethan's patient love. As the Montana night deepened around their small cabin, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast sky. Beatrice Taylor knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The hardships she had endured had led her here, to this man, this child, this life full of promise and possibility, and she wouldn't change a single step of the journey. 5 years later, the rocking tea ranch had prospered beyond anyone's expectations. Under Ethan's management, and with Jacob's experienced guidance, they'd weathered drought and harsh winters, expanding their operations to include not just cattle but also horses bred specifically for the U.S. cavalry. Beatrice's gardens had grown into a proper orchard and vegetable farm that supplied not only the ranch, but also the growing town nearby. Her preserves and apple butter had won ribbons at the territorial fair 3 years running. Hope, now a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's determination and her adoptive father's kind eyes, had been joined by 2 brothers, 3-year-old Jacob, named for their benefactor, and baby William, just 6 months old. On the anniversary of the day Ethan had found Beatrice bleeding in her yard, they always took a private moment to remember. Not to dwell in the past, but to acknowledge how far they had come, how precious their happiness was precisely because they understood its fragility. This year, after the children were asleep, they sat together on their expanded porch, a quilt wrapped around their shoulders against the autumn chill. "I heard from the sheriff today," Ethan said quietly. "Gerald died in prison. Pneumonia, apparently." Beatrice absorbed the news silently. Once she had loved the man. Once she had believed in their future together. His betrayal had nearly cost her everything, but had ultimately led her to true happiness. It was difficult to know what to feel. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked, concerned by her silence. "Yes," she said truthfully. "I'm sad for the man he could have been, but I let go of him long ago." She turned to her husband, touching his face gently. "He has no place in our life now." Ethan kissed her palm. "No, he doesn't, but I'll always be grateful that his worst act brought me to you." From the moment he had carried her across the prairie, Beatrice had known Ethan Taylor was a good man. What she couldn't have known then was how completely he would transform her world, how thoroughly he would restore her faith in love and humanity. Their life wasn't without challenges. Montana Territory remained a harsh place, demanding resilience and hard work. But they faced each difficulty together, their partnership equal and strong, their family bonds unbreakable. As the sun set on another year of their life together, painting the vast sky in colors no artist could capture, Beatrice leaned against her husband's solid shoulder, contentment settling deep in her bones. The sound of their children sleeping peacefully inside, the distant lowing of cattle in the home pasture, the gentle creaking of the porch swing, these were the melodies of her happiness, the soundtrack to the life she had built from the ashes of betrayal. "I love you, Ethan Taylor," she whispered, words she never tired of saying. "Thank you for finding me." "I love you, Beatrice Taylor," he replied, his voice still holding the wonder of a man who couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "Thank you for giving me a reason to keep looking." Together they watched the stars emerge, bright points of light in the gathering darkness, eternal witnesses to their enduring love story, a story that had begun with a desperate ride across the prairie, and continued now in the legacy they were creating together, day by day, in this wild and beautiful land they called home.